Anna stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple yet elegant necklace that hung delicately around her neck. It wasn't just any necklace. It was her mother's most treasured possession. This necklace brings luck, her mother always told her, a soft smile appearing every time she mentioned it. Anna had heard the story countless times, how her father had given the necklace to her mother on their wedding day, just before the war separated them. Though Anna had grown up without ever knowing her father, her mother often spoke of him with deep love and longing. Her mother, Maria, was a woman who had endured much in life. The war had torn their family apart, forcing Maria and Anna to flee their hometown in a rush, barely managing to take a few belongings. They had left behind almost everything, including most of the family photos that were either lost or damaged in the chaos. Anna had no memory of her father, only a few blurred and faded images her mother kept in an old box. Still, the necklace felt like a connection to him, as if through it, a part of him remained with them. Today, Anna wore it as a symbol of hope, just as her mother had when she first received it. Anna was nervous, but today was an important day. She had been preparing for this job interview for weeks. It was an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss. Working for one of the most successful companies in the city, she hoped the necklace would bring her the luck she needed. As she left her small apartment, Maria kissed her on the forehead, holding her daughter's hand for a moment. "You'll do great, Anna. Just remember, no matter what, this necklace carries the strength of our family. Your father believed in it, and so do I." The office building was enormous, towering above the streets with its reflective glass windows gleaming in the sun. Anna felt a knot in her stomach as she walked in, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She was led into the interview room where Mr. Donovan, the company's CEO, waited. He was an older man, his face lined with years of experience, and perhaps something more, a quiet sadness that seemed to linger in his eyes. He smiled politely as she sat down, and they exchanged the usual pleasantries. The interview began smoothly. Anna answered the questions confidently, drawing on her education and limited work experience. She spoke of her aspirations, her dedication, and her willingness to learn. Mr. Donovan listened attentively, though there was something distant in his gaze, as if he were distracted by something beyond the conversation. At first, she thought it was just nerves playing tricks on her, but then, as his eyes drifted toward her necklace, his expression subtly shifted. For a moment he froze, his eyes locked onto the necklace, and his breathing seemed to catch. Anna noticed, but didn't know what to make of it. Maybe he recognized the style of the necklace, or maybe it reminded him of something. She couldn't tell. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Donovan blinked and shook his head slightly, as if snapping himself out of a trance. He continued the interview, though Anna could sense his mind wasn't fully present anymore. As they wrapped up, Mr. Donovan stood, offering her a firm handshake. "Thank you, Miss Hernandez. We'll be in touch soon." He gave her a final, lingering look before she left the room. Outside, Anna felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. The interview had gone well, but something about Mr. Donovan's reaction to her necklace unsettled her. She couldn't quite place why. That evening, back at home, Anna shared the details of her day with her mother. Maria listened intently as Anna described the interview and the strange moment when Mr. Donovan had seemed fixated on the necklace. Maria's face grew thoughtful, her fingers gently touching the necklace still hanging around Anna's neck. Perhaps it reminded him of something from his past, Maria suggested softly. Anna nodded, though the odd feeling from the encounter lingered in her mind. What Anna didn't know was that Mr. Donovan hadn't stopped thinking about the necklace since the moment he saw it. There was something hauntingly familiar about it, something he couldn't shake. It looked almost exactly like a necklace he had once given to his wife over 2 decades ago, before the war tore his family apart. But that was impossible, wasn't it? His wife and daughter had disappeared during the war, and despite all his efforts to find them, they had never been located. Over the years, he had given up hope, assuming the worst. Yet, here was this young woman, Anna, wearing a necklace that bore a striking resemblance to the one he had gifted so long ago. The more he thought about it, the more the details of her face, her mannerisms, and even her smile reminded him of his wife. He tried to convince himself that it was just his mind playing tricks, that he was seeing what he wanted to see. But the doubt crept in, and Mr. Donovan found himself questioning everything. That night, he pulled out an old photo of his wife and daughter. The picture was faded and worn from years of being handled, but the necklace was clear in the image, draped around his wife's neck. His heart ached as he compared it to the one he had seen earlier on Anna. Could it really be the same? And if so, who was this young woman? His mind raced with possibilities, but the only way to be sure was to investigate further. As he sat in his quiet home, the memories of the war came flooding back. The bombings, the frantic search for his family, the years of heartache and unanswered questions. He had searched for so long, only to find nothing. Now, after all these years, had fate brought his daughter right to his doorstep without him even realizing it? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed answers. Anna's first day at work arrived sooner than expected. The excitement from being hired at such a prestigious company hadn't yet faded. She woke up early, preparing herself with the same diligence she had applied during her interview. Today, she decided to wear something special, one of her mother's old dresses. It was a classic vintage piece that Maria had kept in perfect condition over the years. Anna thought it would be a subtle way of honoring her mother and carrying a piece of her into this new chapter of her life. As she adjusted the dress in the mirror, Anna couldn't help but notice how much she resembled her mother in her younger days. With the necklace hanging around her neck, and now wearing the dress, she felt even more connected to the past. "Mom, I'm sure this will be a good day. I can feel it," she whispered to herself, taking one last look before heading out the door. Little did she know, this simple outfit choice would stir something much deeper in her boss, Mr. Donovan, when they crossed paths later that day. Arriving at the office, Anna was determined to make a strong impression. She walked into the sleek, modern building with confidence, though her heart raced with nerves. As she stepped out of the elevator and entered the office floor, she immediately noticed the respectful, professional atmosphere. Colleagues were focused but friendly, greeting her with welcoming smiles. Anna felt a surge of relief. This environment was exactly where she wanted to be. She knew she had to prove herself. But something told her that today would be the start of a promising future. Mr. Donovan arrived later that morning, looking as composed and professional as always. However, as he passed by Anna's desk, something made him stop in his tracks. His eyes caught sight of her necklace again, but this time, something else stood out. The dress. His heart skipped a beat. It was not just a necklace. It was the combination of the dress and the necklace together. They triggered memories buried deep in his mind. Memories of a time long ago, before the war, before everything changed. For a moment, Mr. Donovan couldn't move. His gaze fixed on Anna, and a strange sensation of familiarity washed over him. She looked so much like Maria, his wife, as she had appeared in their early days together. He had to remind himself that this couldn't be possible. His wife and daughter had been lost to him for more than 20 years. Still, the resemblance was undeniable, and it made him feel uncomfortably emotional in a setting where he was supposed to be the composed CEO. Anna, noticing her boss standing still, looked up with a polite smile, though slightly confused by his behavior. "Good morning, Mr. Donovan," she said, hoping to break the silence. Her voice snapped him out of his trance. He cleared his throat and nodded, forcing a smile in return. "Good morning, Anna," he replied, his tone more subdued than usual. Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into his office. Inside his office, Mr. Donovan sat at his desk, his mind racing. The resemblance was too striking to be mere coincidence. There was something about this young woman, Anna, that stirred up feelings he hadn't allowed himself to confront in years. He couldn't let this go, not without digging deeper. Could it be that she was somehow connected to the family he had lost so long ago? Could this be his daughter? Throughout the day, Mr. Donovan found himself distracted, unable to focus on his work. He replayed the moment he saw Anna in the dress and necklace over and over in his mind. The way she carried herself, her facial expressions, and even the way she spoke. It all reminded him of Maria. The more he thought about it, the more it began to make sense. There had been moments during the interview, too, when he had felt that same sense of familiarity. Though he had brushed it off at the time, he decided that he needed to investigate, but he would have to be careful. He couldn't simply ask Anna outright. That would be inappropriate and potentially damaging if he was wrong. Instead, he resolved to look into her background quietly. If she really was his daughter, there would be evidence, something that could confirm the connection without causing unnecessary alarm. That evening, after most of the staff had gone home, Mr. Donovan stayed late at the office. He logged into the company's database and began searching through Anna's employment records. He wanted to know more about her, where she had grown up, her family background, anything that might give him a clue. As he read through the information, he discovered that Anna lived with her mother in a modest neighborhood not far from the city center. Her mother's name was listed as Maria Hernandez. His heart skipped a beat. Maria. Could it really be the same woman? The address was close enough that it seemed plausible. But Donovan knew he needed more than just a name and an address to be sure. There were many women named Maria after all, and this could simply be a coincidence. However, the more he dug, the more his suspicions grew. He recalled the old neighborhood they had lived in during the early days of the war, the place where they had been separated. Anna's home was not far from that area. It was as if fate had brought her back into his life, right when he least expected it. Unable to contain his curiosity, Mr. Donovan decided that he would drive by the neighborhood the following day. He had to see for himself if this Maria was the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost all those years ago. As he left the office that night, his mind raced with possibilities. If Anna was his daughter, it would mean that everything he thought he had lost was within reach again. But he also knew that approaching the situation recklessly could cause more harm than good. He had to be careful, patient, and methodical. Meanwhile, Anna was at home, completely unaware of the turmoil she had stirred in her boss. She had no idea that the man who had hired her was her own father, the man her mother had spoken of in whispers for so many years. As she sat at the dinner table with her mother, Anna shared details of her first day, smiling as she recounted the welcoming atmosphere of the office. Maria listened with pride, though the mention of Mr. Donovan's strange behavior made her pause. "He seemed a bit off," Anna remarked. "He looked at me for a long time, almost like he was trying to remember something." Maria's expression tightened, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Maybe he just had a long day," she said, though her heart was racing. Could it be that the past was catching up to them? The following morning, Anna walked into the office with a renewed sense of excitement. The first day had gone well, aside from the peculiar moment when Mr. Donovan had stared at her necklace. She dismissed it as a passing curiosity, figuring it might have just reminded him of something personal. But today, she felt ready to dive into her new responsibilities, eager to prove her worth at the company. She had no idea that behind the scenes, her boss was preparing to uncover secrets she had never imagined. Mr. Donovan, on the other hand, had barely slept. His thoughts had been consumed by the possibility that Anna might be his daughter. The name Maria Hernandez echoed in his mind throughout the night, stirring memories that he had tried to bury for years. It had to be the same Maria. It had to be, but he couldn't allow himself to act impulsively. The consequences of being wrong were too great. If Anna wasn't his daughter, approaching her with such a delicate topic could harm her, not to mention ruin the professional relationship they were just beginning to build. As Anna settled into her tasks, she noticed Mr. Donovan pass by her desk several times throughout the morning, his eyes lingering on her more than usual. She brushed it off, assuming he was simply checking in on how she was adjusting. What she didn't know was that he was silently piecing together the puzzle in his mind, comparing the fragments of his memories with the details of Anna's appearance and mannerisms. Every time he looked at her, he saw glimpses of Maria, and it both thrilled and terrified him. Determined to find answers, Mr. Donovan decided to drive by the neighborhood where Anna lived during his lunch break. He needed to see if the Maria listed as Anna's mother was truly his long-lost wife. His heart raced as he neared the address. The modest houses lining the street looked familiar. Too familiar. As he pulled up a few houses down from Anna's, he spotted a woman walking out to water her plants. His breath caught in his throat. It was Maria. There was no mistaking her. Even after all these years, she still had the same grace in her movements, the same determined look on her face as she went about her tasks. Mr. Donovan felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. This was the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost, and the woman he had spent over 2 decades searching for. And now, here she was, living just a few miles away, with their daughter working in his very office. He sat frozen in his car, unsure of what to do next. Maria didn't notice him. She went about her chores, completely unaware of the man sitting in the car nearby. Mr. Donovan watched her for a few minutes, trying to compose himself. He couldn't just rush in and announce himself. That would be reckless. He had to think about Anna. How would she react if she found out her boss was actually her father? Would she feel betrayed, confused, or even resentful that he hadn't found them sooner? These thoughts kept him rooted in his seat, unable to act. As the lunch hour came to an end, Mr. Donovan reluctantly drove back to the office, his mind swirling with questions and emotions. He had confirmation now. Maria was alive, and she had raised their daughter alone. But how had they ended up here, so close yet so far from him? What had happened during the chaos of the war that separated them for so long? He needed answers, but he wasn't sure how to approach either Maria or Anna without causing upheaval in their lives. Back at the office, Anna noticed that Mr. Donovan seemed distracted during the afternoon meetings. He was quieter than usual, often lost in thought, his brow furrowed in concentration. At one point, he looked directly at her across the conference table, his eyes softening as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Anna felt a strange pang of unease. Was there something he wasn't telling her? Why did he seem so distant, yet so focused on her at the same time? Later that evening, Anna shared her observations with her mother during dinner. "Mr. Donovan seemed a bit off today," Anna remarked, cutting into her food. "It's like he's always watching me, but not in a bad way, just curious, I guess." Maria's hands paused for a moment as she set her glass down. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly recovered, not wanting to alarm Anna. "Maybe he's just keeping an eye on his new employee. It's normal for a boss to want to see how you're settling in," she suggested, her tone casual, though inside she was beginning to worry. Maria had lived in fear for years, always wondering if their past would come back to haunt them. She had never told Anna the full story of what happened during the war, how they had been forced to flee in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind. She had kept the truth from her daughter, hoping to shield her from the pain of knowing that her father had been searching for them, just as they had searched for him. But as Anna grew older, Maria knew the day would come when the truth would surface. Mr. Donovan, meanwhile, spent the rest of the evening going through old records, trying to piece together the missing years. He found old news clippings about the bombings in their hometown, reports of families being separated, and refugees fleeing to other cities. His family's name appeared in a few of the documents, listed among the many who had been displaced. But there was no definitive record of what had happened to Maria and their daughter. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The more he uncovered, the more Mr. Donovan realized how much he had lost. His wife, his daughter, the life they had planned together. All of it had been ripped away in an instant, and for years he had been powerless to change it. But now, fate had brought them back into his life. He was sure of it. Anna was his daughter, and Maria was still out there, living her life without him. The weight of that realization hit him like a ton of bricks. But what now? How could he approach Anna with this information? He couldn't simply tell her the truth without any proof. And he had no idea how Maria would react if she discovered that he had found them. There were too many uncertainties, too many variables that could lead to disaster if handled improperly. Mr. Donovan knew he had to tread carefully, or he risked losing his family all over again. As the night wore on, Mr. Donovan made a decision. He would continue to gather information discreetly, learning as much as he could about Anna and Maria before making his move. He couldn't afford to act rashly, not when so much was at stake. For now, he would observe from a distance, biding his time until the moment was right. But deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would either reunite his family or shatter them beyond repair. Mr. Donovan spent the next few days carefully observing Anna, unable to shake the overwhelming feeling that his suspicions were true. Every small detail, the way she moved, the way she spoke, reminded him of Maria. But it was more than just her physical resemblance to her mother. There was something in Anna's spirit, in her drive and determination, that echoed the same qualities that had made him fall in love with Maria all those years ago. Yet, even with these mounting clues, he knew he couldn't approach her directly. Not yet. Instead, he continued to gather information in secret, using the resources at his disposal. He found more details about Anna's upbringing, confirming that she had lived with her mother, Maria Hernandez, in the city for most of her life. They had moved frequently in the years after the war, but had finally settled in a modest neighborhood not far from the office. Each piece of information felt like another step closer to the truth, yet also deepened the mystery. Why hadn't Maria ever tried to contact him? What had really happened during those chaotic years? Mr. Donovan's mind was flooded with memories of the war, of the day everything changed. He remembered the bombings, the panic that had swept through their town, and the desperate attempt to flee. He had been separated from Maria and their daughter in the confusion, and despite his best efforts, he had never been able to find them. For years he had searched, following every lead, but eventually the trail went cold. He had been forced to accept the possibility that they hadn't survived. But now, here was Anna, wearing the necklace he had given Maria as a wedding gift. It couldn't be a coincidence. On the fourth day, Mr. Donovan could no longer contain his curiosity. He decided to visit Anna's neighborhood again, but this time with a plan. He wanted to see Maria face to face, to confront her and finally get the answers he had been searching for all these years. He waited until the early evening, when he knew Anna would still be at work. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the small, neatly kept house where Anna lived. He parked a few houses down and took a deep breath before walking towards the front door. Just as he reached the gate, Maria stepped outside, carrying a basket of laundry. The sight of her sent a wave of emotion crashing over him. She looked older, of course, with lines on her face that hadn't been there before, but she was still the same woman he had loved. For a moment he stood frozen, unsure of how to approach her. Then, gathering his courage, he called out softly, "Maria." Maria turned, her eyes widening in shock as she saw him standing there. For a second, it seemed like she didn't recognize him. But then her expression changed. First to disbelief, then to something deeper, something that mirrored the pain and loss they had both endured. She dropped the basket, the clothes spilling out on the ground as she took a step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "James," he nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "It's me, Maria." He struggled to find the words. After more than 20 years apart, what could he possibly say? "I've been looking for you, for both of you." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she stepped closer, her hands trembling. I thought you were dead. We lost you in the chaos, and I." Her voice broke as the tears spilled over. "I searched for so long, but we never found anything. I thought you were gone." James, Mr. Donovan, shook his head, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I never stopped looking, Maria. I searched everywhere. I followed every lead, but it was like you disappeared. And now, after all this time, Anna, she's..." Maria's hand flew to her mouth as realization dawned on her. "You know about Anna?" He nodded. "She works for me, Maria. I didn't realize it at first, but then I saw the necklace and, God, she looks so much like you. I had to be sure. I had to know." Maria's tears flowed freely now. She looked down, shaking her head. I never thought this day would come. I never thought we'd see you again. After the war, after losing everything, I just focused on keeping Anna safe. I didn't want to tell her too much. I didn't want her to grow up with the same pain I carried. James stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. I understand Maria, but she deserves to know the truth. She deserves to know who her father is. Maria wiped her tears, her expression a mix of relief and fear. But how? How do we tell her after all this time? She barely remembers the war. She doesn't know anything about what happened, about you. I've tried to protect her from the worst of it. We'll tell her together, James said softly. We'll explain everything. She's strong, Maria, just like you. She'll understand. Maria hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. She has to know. But I don't even know how to begin. James squeezed her hands gently. We'll figure it out. The important thing is that we're together now. We have a chance to be a family again after all these years. I won't let anything take that away from us. They stood there for a moment in silence, the weight of the years apart settling between them. It was overwhelming, the realization that they had both survived, that they had both been living in the same city without knowing. But now, they had a chance to rebuild what had been lost. Maria finally pulled away, her voice still shaky but stronger now. Anna will be home soon. We should tell her tonight. James nodded, his heart heavy with anticipation. Yes, tonight. As they made their way inside, the weight of the upcoming conversation loomed large over them. Maria busied herself preparing tea, her hands still trembling slightly. James sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing with how Anna would react. Would she accept him as her father? Would she be angry that they had been separated for so long? There were so many unanswered questions, but the only way to move forward was to confront them head-on. When Anna arrived home that evening, she immediately sensed something was different. Her mother's face was flushed, and there was a man sitting at their kitchen table. A man who looked strangely familiar, yet whom she couldn't quite place. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and Anna felt a knot forming in her stomach. She looked from her mother to the man and back again, her voice hesitant as she asked, Mom, what's going on? Who is this? Maria took a deep breath, glancing at James before turning back to her daughter. Anna, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Anna stood frozen at the doorway, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the tension in the room. Her mother's tone, the nervous glances between her and the man sitting at their kitchen table. It all felt wrong. She had never seen her mother this way before. There was a heaviness in the air that made Anna's chest tighten, her heart pounding as if it already knew something monumental was about to be revealed. Mom, who is this? Anna repeated, her voice trembling slightly. She looked at the man again, studying his features. There was something strangely familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. His eyes, though kind, carried a weight of sadness that made her feel uneasy. Why was he here? And why did it seem like her mother was on the verge of breaking down? Maria took a deep breath, her hands wringing together nervously. She glanced at the man, then back at Anna, her eyes filled with guilt and something else, fear. Anna, she began softly, there's something I've kept from you for a long time. Something I thought I was protecting you from. But now I see that you have the right to know. Anna felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean, Mom? What are you talking about? Maria's voice cracked as she spoke again. This man is James. He's your father. The words hit Anna like a punch to the stomach. She blinked, her mind struggling to process what her mother had just said. My father, she repeated in disbelief, her voice barely a whisper. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her father was dead. That's what she had always believed. He had been lost during the war, a casualty of the chaos and destruction that had torn their lives apart. How could this man, this stranger, possibly be her father? James stood up slowly, his expression filled with emotion. "Anna," he said quietly, his voice deep and steady, though she could hear the strain behind it. "It's true. I'm your father. I've been searching for you and your mother for over 20 years. I never gave up hope that I would find you." Anna took a step back, shaking her head in disbelief. No, this doesn't make any sense. My father is dead. You can't be him. This can't be happening." Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and anger. She felt betrayed, not just by this man claiming to be her father, but by her mother for keeping this secret from her for so long. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she stepped toward her daughter, her voice pleading. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. After the war, when we lost him, I thought it would be easier for you if you didn't carry the weight of that loss. I was wrong to keep it from you for so long, but I never imagined that we would ever find him again. And now, here he is." Anna felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She had spent her entire life believing one thing, and now, in the space of a few minutes, her entire world had been turned upside down. She looked at James, searching his face for something, anything, that would make this all make sense. "How do I even know this is true?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You could be anyone. How can I trust this?" James' face softened and he nodded, understanding her reaction. "I know this is a lot to take in, and you have every right to question it, but it's true. I am your father, and I can prove it. The necklace you wear, I gave that to your mother on our wedding day. I've been looking for that necklace for years, hoping it would lead me back to you." Anna instinctively touched the necklace at her throat, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. She had worn it for as long as she could remember. It had always been a part of her, a symbol of the love her mother had for her father, or so she thought. Now, this man was telling her it was the key to finding them, the key to his identity. Maria stepped forward, her voice still soft, but filled with conviction. "He's telling the truth, Anna. I didn't want to believe it at first either, but when I saw him, when I heard his voice, I knew. It's him. It's the man I loved, the man I lost all those years ago." Anna felt her legs growing weak, and she stumbled slightly before finding a chair to sit down. Her head was spinning with too many emotions to handle at once. Shock, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. She looked at her mother, then back at James, still not fully able to grasp the reality of what they were telling her. How could this man, her boss of all people, be her father? The thought seemed too surreal to be real. "I need some air," Anna said abruptly, standing up and moving toward the door. Maria reached out to stop her, but James gently shook his head, signaling to let her go. Anna stepped outside into the cool evening air, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. She felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her feet, and she didn't know how to regain her balance. Her father, she had spent her entire life thinking he was gone, that he was nothing more than a distant memory from her mother's past. And now, here he was, standing in her kitchen, telling her he had been looking for them all this time. How was she supposed to process that? As she stood outside, gazing up at the darkening sky, her mind began to wander through fragments of memories. Conversations with her mother, moments when she had asked about her father and received only vague answers. Now, it all made sense. Her mother had been hiding the truth, not out of malice, but out of a desire to protect her. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. After a few minutes, Anna heard the soft creak of the door opening behind her. She didn't turn around, but she knew it was James who had followed her outside. He stood a few feet away, silent at first, giving her the space she needed. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said quietly, "and I know you probably have 1,000 questions. You don't have to accept me right away. I understand if you need time, but I want you to know that I've always loved you. I've always wanted to find you, and now that I have, I'm not going to disappear again." Anna stayed silent, her emotions too tangled to respond. She didn't know what to feel. Part of her wanted to believe him, to run into his arms and feel the warmth of a father she never knew. But another part of her, the part that had lived without him for so long, felt guarded, unwilling to let herself trust so easily. "I'm not asking for anything," James continued, his voice steady. "I just want to be here for you, however you need me. I've missed so much of your life, and I can never make up for that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Anna finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. She didn't know what to say. The only thing she knew for certain was that her life would never be the same again. The following days were a whirlwind for Anna. The shock of discovering that the man she had been working for was her father left her reeling. She spent most of her time in a daze, trying to process the information that had been thrust upon her so suddenly. Her mother, Maria, had been quieter than usual, giving Anna space to absorb everything. And James, her father, she reminded herself, had been nothing but patient, allowing her the time and distance she needed. But no amount of space could erase the deep confusion and turmoil Anna felt inside. She had grown up without a father, filling the void with stories her mother told of a man who was brave, kind, and loving. But those were only fragments of a person, carefully curated by her mother to shield her from the painful truth of their separation. Now, here was the real man, a stranger, yet undeniably connected to her. Every time she thought about him, it stirred something deep inside her, a mix of resentment and longing that she didn't know how to confront. Anna had taken a few days off from work, unable to face the idea of seeing James again so soon. She spent her time walking through the city, visiting places that were familiar, hoping that the routine would ground her. But everywhere she went, she was haunted by the revelation. The necklace around her neck felt heavier than usual, as though it carried the full weight of the past with it. On the third day, Anna decided to return to work. Staying away wouldn't solve anything, and she needed to regain a sense of normalcy. As she walked into the office, she was greeted with the usual smiles and nods from her colleagues, but she felt like a different person. The office, once a place of excitement and potential, now felt like the setting for a story she hadn't chosen to be part of. She wondered how James would act around her, if he would treat her any differently now that she knew the truth. To her surprise, when she saw him that morning, he was as professional as ever. He greeted her with the same calm, polite demeanor he had always used, though there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Anna appreciated the fact that he didn't push her. He didn't ask if she wanted to talk or force any conversation about their relationship. He was giving her time, and for that, she was grateful. But even as she tried to focus on her work, her mind kept wandering back to him. Every glance, every small interaction between them felt loaded with unspoken words. She caught herself watching him, studying his movements, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the image she had built up in her mind over the years. Was this really her father? The man who had been missing from her life for so long? Later that afternoon, as the office began to quiet down, James approached her desk. He stood there for a moment, waiting until she looked up from her computer. "Anna," he said softly, "I was wondering if we could talk for a few minutes." "Not here, though. Maybe we could go for a walk." Anna hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to avoid the conversation altogether. But she knew that wasn't fair, not to him, not to herself. She nodded slowly. "Okay, let me finish up here, and we can go." They left the office and walked in silence for a few blocks until they reached a small park nearby. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the trees, and the sound of birds chirping filled the air. They found a bench and sat down, the space between them filled with the weight of unspoken emotions. James was the first to break the silence. "I know this isn't easy," he began, his voice low and careful. "And I'm not expecting you to accept everything all at once. I just wanted to say that I'm here, Anna. I've always wanted to be here for you, even if it took me far too long to find you." Anna stared ahead, not looking at him. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted quietly. "My whole life, I thought you were dead. And now, out of nowhere, you're here. You're my boss, you're my father. It's a lot." James nodded, understanding her hesitation. I can't imagine what that must be like for you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not finding you sooner, for not being there when you needed me. But I want to make up for it, if you'll let me. Anna finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know how we're supposed to move forward. It feels like there's this huge gap between us. You're a stranger to me, even though you're supposed to be my father. I know, James said, his voice heavy with regret. I don't expect us to fix everything overnight, but I want to try. I want to get to know you, Anna. The real you, not just the person I've imagined all these years. For a moment, they sat in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Anna didn't know how to respond. She had spent so long without a father, learning how to live, how to survive, without that presence in her life. Now, he was offering her something she had long since stopped hoping for, a chance to reconnect, to build something new from the broken pieces of their past. Finally, Anna spoke again, her voice softer this time. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I've been okay without a father for so long. I don't even know what it means to have one anymore. James looked at her, his eyes filled with both pain and hope. I understand. I don't want to force anything, but I'll be here, Anna, whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere this time. Anna nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. She didn't know if she was ready to let him in, but there was a part of her, a small, fragile part, that wanted to. The father she had imagined was different from the man sitting beside her, but maybe, just maybe, they could find some common ground. Maybe they could begin to heal the divide that had kept them apart for so long. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Anna and James sat together, not as boss and employee, but as two people connected by something much deeper, something that had been lost, but perhaps could be found again. Over the next few weeks, the relationship between Anna and James slowly began to evolve. At work, things remained professional, as neither wanted to draw attention to the complex reality unfolding beneath the surface. But outside the office, they started to spend more time together, brief lunches, quiet walks in the park, and eventually, longer conversations about the past. Each interaction was careful, tentative, as though they were both afraid of saying too much or not enough. Anna found herself opening up more than she expected. Despite her initial resistance, there was a part of her that was curious about this man who had been a ghost in her life for so long. James was patient, never pushing her, always letting her set the pace. He answered her questions with honesty, sometimes with pain in his voice, but always with a steady calm that reassured her. He told her about the war, about the frantic search for her and Maria, and about the endless, heartbreaking years of searching for any trace of them. It was strange for Anna to hear these stories, to learn about the man her father had been, brave, determined, and filled with hope. It was even stranger to think that this man, who had once been so distant, was now right in front of her, sharing the most vulnerable parts of his life. Slowly, Anna began to see him not just as her father, but as a person, with all the complexities and flaws that came with that. And though the wounds of the past were still fresh, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something from the wreckage. One afternoon, they met at a small cafe near Anna's apartment. It had become their routine, meeting in places where they could talk freely, away from the constraints of the office. As they sipped their coffee, Anna looked at James thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've told me," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "About how you looked for us, and how hard it must have been to not find anything for so long." James nodded, setting his cup down. "It was the hardest thing I've ever had to endure," he admitted. "Every day, not knowing if you and your mother were alive, not knowing if I'd ever see you again, it nearly broke me." Anna felt a pang of sympathy as she listened to his words. She had always known the pain of not having a father, but she had never considered what it must have been like for him. Living with the uncertainty, the constant search for answers that never came. "Why didn't you give up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Most people would have, after so many years, they would have just stopped looking. James smiled faintly, his eyes softening. Because you were my family. I couldn't give up on that, no matter how impossible it seemed. I always believed that if I kept searching, if I kept hoping, I would find you one day. And I did. His words touched something deep within Anna. She had grown up believing that her father was gone, lost to the war and the chaos that followed. But now, sitting across from him, hearing the depth of his love and dedication, she realized that the story she had been told wasn't the whole truth. Her father hadn't abandoned them. He had fought to find them, even when the odds were stacked against him. And somehow, that made all the difference. For the first time since they had reconnected, Anna felt a sense of peace settling over her. She had spent so long protecting herself from the pain of the past, from the fear of being hurt again, that she hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace the present. But now, with James sitting in front of her, his love for her clear in every word, she realized that maybe it was time to let go of the fear. Maybe it was time to let him in. "I want to try," Anna said suddenly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to try to have a relationship with you. I know it won't be easy, and I'm still figuring out how to deal with all of this, but I don't want to let this chance slip away." James looked at her, his eyes bright with emotion. He reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "I want that too, Anna, more than anything." His voice was thick with emotion, and for a moment, they sat there in silence, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Over the next few weeks, Anna and James continued to build on the fragile foundation they had laid. They spent more time together, talking about everything from their past to their hopes for the future. Anna introduced him to her mother's favorite spots in the city, places that had been part of their routine for years, but which now took on new meaning as James became part of her life. And as they shared these moments, Anna began to feel the divide between them slowly closing. One evening, they sat together in Anna's living room, flipping through old photo albums that Maria had kept over the years. The photos were a mix of happy moments and difficult times. Images of Anna as a child, her mother standing beside her, always smiling despite the hardships they had faced. As they turned the pages, James grew quiet, his eyes lingering on a photo of Maria holding Anna as a baby. "I miss so much," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I wasn't there for her childhood. I wasn't there for you." Anna placed her hand on his arm, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "But you're here now," she said softly, "and that's what matters." James nodded, but Anna could see the pain in his eyes, the years of absence weighing heavily on him. She knew it would take time for him to come to terms with the lost years, just as it would take time for her to fully accept him as her father. But they were both willing to try, and that was enough for now. As the evening wore on, they continued to flip through the album, sharing stories and memories that bridged the gap between the past and the present. And as they did, Anna realized that while the road ahead might be difficult, it was also filled with possibility. They had been given a second chance, a chance to heal, to reconnect, and to create new memories together. And for the first time in a long time, Anna felt hopeful about the future. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care.